I started out this morning by saying that Sweden kind of is in the middle of a transition, a social transition, where the role and the responsibility of the civil society has increased. Thus, funding and support for the civil society must increase as well. And we know that fact that Swedish people are very generous. The last panel, we're talking about that as well. And even despite the fact that Sweden doesn't have that type of tax reduction that was mentioned for the US, for example. But the questions that rises are, how can we meet this need for an increase in support for the civil society? And what mechanism can ignite even bigger philanthropic behavior? We've heard today how new challenges fuel innovative ideas for new social impact models through, for example, social entrepreneurship. But what about government policies? What is going on in that area? We will now listen to a very experienced panel on the topic of inside government policy, igniting change and innovation. It is my honor to introduce to you now Mr. Dan Olofsson, founder of Star for Life, entrepreneur and philanthropist, and also Ms. Gunilla Carlsson, speaker and former member of the European Parliament and former Swedish Minister of International Development Cooperation. To moderate this session, we have Ms. Tove Lifvendahl, writer and speaker and political editor-in-chief for Svenska Dagbladet. Please welcome. Give them a hand, yay!
Thank you so much. Let's see if we can have some...
Dan i mitten, va?
Ska mitten?
Nej, ja. Det får du göra som du vill.
I wonder if we can just get some glasses here.
Okay.
Perfect, tack. So, great to see you all here, and we're also very happy that you stay awake now for the final session here. You've already been introduced, so I can go directly to my questions. And we will talk about, now after this long day, we will try to draw some conclusions, but also start from the work you both have been doing in your separate fields. Gunilla, the bottom line of philanthropy is a drive to improve the world and solve problems, right? But that is also true for the political field, and that is also true for businesses, most of them. And it's also true for the voluntary sector. And yet it seems to be difficult to do the right things and find simple ways of cooperation. So how could you explain that?
Well, thank you, Tove, and thank you for organizing this and having this opportunity now to come down a little bit to what's happening in Sweden. And I'm thrilled about the 2030 discussions, but also to seeing the problems that we do see here, because I think, and perhaps specifically in Sweden, that we are so specialized. That means that we have built a lot of systems, bureaucracies, and so on and so forth, and that everyone are very good in their own things. Sometimes says that there are silos. But I think also we have to see that there are different legislations and sources of financing when we want to do good. But then also have we defined what is doing good? Because there are so many different views about that. And I think we then have to focus on what are we trying to do together, and can we do it together? For whom, why, and how? And that is, I think, something we haven't thought about, because these many giant organizations like SIDA, they have to protect themselves. They are not built to reach out now. And that is a problem in a time where all big organizations are challenged, thanks to technology, thanks to globalization and everything like that. So it's a golden opportunity. So you can lead that or you can be a victim of it. And I think that's why it's so important to discuss this in a broader context, like your question indicated.
Would you agree what was said on the last panel here before, that businesses can do much more than politics?
Absolutely. Because I think we talked, but of course it depends. I think politics have to create kind of a platform, arena, can also take a lead sometimes, but should also be humble enough to understand that politics are not for taking too much of risks. It's not so good at innovations, actually, and is sometimes not in these days taking the leadership and going forward, rather being more reactive. So that's why I think what we have learned today about everything that's happening in Sweden is so fantastic, with philanthropies, but also companies, tech, and so on and so forth. So I think in these times, yes, business, I'm afraid, has to take the lead.
Another take on that would be, I mean, you have a discussion also which will say that the risk aversion also in business society spreads out now, that we have a less innovative capitalism than we should have. So there should be, I mean, the search for innovative ideas is crucial also in business sector for the moment.
Yeah, but I think that's also the beauty with entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs that knows how to handle risk and also to be sustainable and having a long-term perspective on money and risk-taking, and also to using the opportunities. So I think, yes, risk is something everyone has to work with and to assess in a very serious manner. But I think also that there is a lot of capital out there. They just have to be awaked and challenged, and being able to source with different, perhaps not only different sources coming together, but perhaps also sequencing it. But that means that everyone has to go down from their silos and trying to identify what can we do together. And then I think when you're trying to do things together, you should be concrete. You should not try to solve the whole world at once.
One step at a time. Speaking of risk, when you were Minister for International Development, you didn't exactly choose the easy path, so to say. You chose to reform profoundly within the systems, which created a lot of stir and enemies also, could we say. Could you give the elevator pitch on what was done and why?
Okay. But first I have to say, I'm so proud to stand, to listen, to see that, to talk about challenge funds, to talk about credits, loans, guarantees, and all these things. It gives me a great pleasure. I hope the same enthusiasm are still there around to continue that path and to work more with business and innovations. Elevator pitch, okay? So I think what I tried to do when I was a development minister was to say we have a double responsibility for the taxpayers and for those that are the drivers of development. That means the people living in poverty. That's it. And to focus on results for both of them, because then you're done.
And you managed?
No. But I tried.
Where were the big thresholds?
I think the silos, the giant organizations that don't want you to move on, the scarcity of change, the predictions about someone coming in that are not part of us. It was a tough time.
Okay. Don, you have been, you wrote in your memoirs that you have 3 parts of life. The first one is to grow up, get educated. The second one was to work. Now you're in the third age and you are spending your time to life projects and you have become a philanthropist. Could you tell us how this journey became?
Yeah, I was an entrepreneur for about 25 years and then I came to a situation in my life that if you do the same thing too many years, maybe you don't see the changes between the years. So I came to the conclusion that I should have my third life to what I call private life quality projects, because that enriches other values in life than you have time to as a hard-working entrepreneur. That's important, but that gave me the opportunity to do other things, which has been exciting.
And could you explain how you started the work Stop Life?
Yeah, we bought land in South Africa, KwaZulu-Natal. It's almost the epicenter of the HIV/AIDS catastrophe. 30-40% of the population had HIV/AIDS. Every second girl in many communities there had it. So sitting there in a nice house and saying, we don't care, it's up to the government to sort it out. That I think would be very difficult for all of us when we see it firsthand. We had staff dying and a lot of things. So we thought if there were some small things we could do in the neighborhood. So we started a cooperation with the school, and because our idea was that the government was on its way to have prevention drugs, antivirus drugs for AIDS. But we said that the key thing is that the young people, next generation, shouldn't get it because their parents were dying. So we started this and created a concept that's running in the ordinary school, and that was 2005.
We heard in the last panel about, is it important to have your name on a big plate? How much? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good, thanks. When you do this work, what is the reward? Is it to know that I, Dan Olofsson, made this?
Now the reward is when you come out to the schools, you see all the young people, and you see that the project has created change. You see that teenage pregnancy goes down and a lot of other numbers. And when you're out on the school, then you get the award. And that's good enough for me. And it's fantastic. It's much better than having your name on the plate. I know Donald Trump likes that, but I think you need to be a big ego to have your name everywhere. But when you see the kids and how they could grow in their life, then you get the reward.
You have spent time in dialogue with local governments and politicians both in South Africa and in Malmö as well. What lessons have you learned from those dialogues?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my general view is that we have a lot of challenges in the world. And I think that the government is very important, the public sector. It could do more than they're doing today. But I also think that the private sector, the enterprises, could do much more. I think the NGOs could do more. And I think we as individuals could do more. So if you combine all this, you get a better development than just having the public sector to do anything. That's my general view. And if we then could cooperate between each other, it also adds value. And I especially think for corporations, I think young people are thinking different than people in my age, because I have a lot of employees, and the employees today, they want to be proud of their companies. And if the companies only way they are focusing on is the profit on the bottom line, they don't get so much excited about that, because the profits go some other way. But if the company is involved in a lot of good things, then they get proud about the company. You build loyalty among your staff. So it's very good for the company to be involved. And I think we have missed that in Sweden. Other countries are much more ahead. But so I think it's a good thing both for the company, and it's a good thing for what we're doing with that. So it's a combination. Then I think it's more sustainable if it's good for the company also. I think it's good to work with philanthropy and charity just because of let's say, the good heart feeling. But if it also supports the company, and it's good for the company, then it gets much more sustainable, because it's a natural way. I was actually in South Africa Saturday last week, and probably was the only time I just went down for one day. But we had a conference there with 140 of my staff, and they went out to the staff for life schools, and so on. And I mean, they were so happy about that. They were so proud. They were coming up with their own initiatives. So we're building culture around this. So I would say that it's underestimated how important it is for companies to be involved in good projects. I think that's a thing to say. So the corporations, the private sector, could do much more, and it's also good for the companies.
Well, I agree. When I was part of the Stockholm City Mission Board, We had a lot of companies that wanted to come and have cooperations with us, and that my demand was that you should be able to do good business out of this, otherwise it won't be sustainable.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
perhaps, I don't know if we have seen the change there, that more companies get more aware when they go into these kind of corporations, or what is your experience there?
Yeah, I wrote an article in Dagens Industri, it's a major Swedish business paper, arguing that we in the business should be more involved here. And then I got a reply in the paper from a guy called Mats Kviberg, that some of you probably know, and he say, this is just a fluga, a
trend.
This is just a trend when the business cycle is on the top, but when the business cycles get down, what cost do you cut first? It's those projects that are not driving profit in the company. So he thought it was a business cycle idea. I would say that this is a long-term view, 30, 100 years. We need to be involved in creating a better world for us, because it's good for everybody. And I think everybody could do their contribution. There's a saying, there's no excuse for you doing nothing. No excuse to do something just because you can't do everything. And no one can do everything. We could all do our small part contribution. And if we all have that thinking, I think all of us find different ways to contribute.
Gunilla, do you have an experience from good or bad examples of businesses going into the area which is not their main focus?
Yeah, but I think what Dan is telling us, because you haven't told us that you're doing a lot of things back home in your hometown Malmö. So I think now when we're talking about the 2030 agenda, that is about challenges is also in our own societies. We have to deal with that. And there is an ever-changing world today where we no longer have Millennium Development Goals and fighting poverty far away. It is something about treating local community to work together, and where private sector and enterprises are so important. So are civil society and others, but also people do count. And I think to understand that and to see that we are entering a new opportunity, but it's also going to be challenging times. So we have to learn from what we have learned to fighting poverty outside, to see how we can empowering societies at home and to use this capacity and the wisdom. It's not only about the capital, it's also about the competence that comes with the money. And for me, I think we have problems to do that from a political side, because we have our roots. It's about taxations, it's about legislation, it's not making it too easy. The civil servants that are dealing with reaching out and doing things, they have their hurdles for good reasons. And this is why I sense that it is very hard to say, it's very easy to say that we shall work together, but it's hard to try to do it. And I spent 7 years as a development minister, but now about 3 years trying to see this, how can this take place in practical? And I can really see that it's easy to talk about, but I haven't yet seen too many good examples of private-public partnerships in order to spur this. Because you have these problems, and someone has to take the lead to identify them, to see what shall we work about, how can it be delivering results. And that's why I think, in one way, Dan Olofsson and some others are paving the way. They are coming with innovations and seeing what we can do if we work a little bit cleverly. And then the politicians, the municipalities, most likely would follow, because there are no lack of demands or opportunities. So yes, I have many thoughts where I thought it was much easier to raise money, to mobilize capacity and knowledge, and it's also from the universities and so on and so forth, to solve something. And it's rather hard. Or perhaps I'm doing it the wrong way, I don't know.
I learned that, I mean, we discussed the social impact bonds as something that was tried out in Great Britain, but now it turns out that we have this beautiful experimenting with this in Norrköping, and Laurent Lexell is doing this with his social venture initiative now. So perhaps that could be on the wish list for next year's symposium, to learn about the experience from these initiatives taking place on Swedish ground, because there will be lessons learned from it. How do you work together in practical? If we turn to Sweden's future then, when talking about philanthropy, from my point of view, I thought that the good thing that really emerged from the migration crisis, the refugee crisis, was that people were activated. So a lot of initiatives were taking place, and a lot of people just went out from their houses or inviting people to their houses, doing things. So it activated that gene, I think, is behind all sorts of giving and cooperation. If we look at philanthropy in Sweden, what kind of obstacles and possibilities would you see within the nearest future, let's say the 5 years? What obstacles are there, if we should start with that? We heard Swedish nature was mentioned in the last panel, that the society culture, we know about that. Policy making is another field. What obstacles do you see if we start there? Who would like to start?
No, but you have really seen it in practice. I think that there is really, from a national political perspective point of view, you have to look through quite a few laws. It is about how you organize, how you deal with taxes, and so on and so forth. You can work around it, but I think if we just start to decide that it is good that we work together, you shouldn't cut down the opportunities to have tax reduction for giving away money. I think there is something into this, just to recognize and to empowering and encouraging. So I think the taxes will be important. And then I think it's also about how we work, that people take leadership, step up and telling very humbly about what they have managed to do, not with a plaquette, but just to say, I did this, and to be a little bit seen and to see that I can also do this. Because there are so many young people now doing social entrepreneurs and finding out things in a little bit different way. And I think if they see that there are some heroes that are also succeeding on a bigger scale, I think that's going to mean a lot. So it's not only about the politics, but it's also about those good investors and early entrants into this, may I call it a market, that are behaving well and showing good practice. That will be very helpful.
But it is, I mean, we say the tax issue first. When I wrote a book where Per and Dan were interviewed, which is initiative from Camilla, sits over there, there was one of the entrepreneurs just talked about the tax issue. And immediately the question from public service radio was, why should rich people have a tax reduction? Why should we help rich people? That was how it was phrased. And that, for me, points out there is a societal issue here in how we view them. My question was, well, because that the reduction is for things that will benefit us all. It will benefit society if it comes true. But there is something in here which we can't, walk by. It's a Swedish society culture which will, it will show. And talk about wealth and talk about philanthropy is, I recognize that when I was searching for people to interview in this book, that not everyone wanted to be there, because in their mindset it was like almost put this name on a big tag. So what kind of reactions do you get, or do anyone give you some kind of criticism, or do you just don't hear it?
I probably don't hear it.
Good.
But I want to say, I think it's the wrong focus of that, because you're not helping the rich people. Because if they give so much to philanthropy for some good projects, and they get a tax return to this, the money goes away to the project. So that's the one who is gaining out of it. So if you give 100 and save 30 in taxes, you're still giving much more than the tax return. So the rich guy there doesn't earn money on that. He just got a lower tax, but he's giving away much more. And the good thing with that is that it goes to good causes. The alternative is that he buys a new Ferrari or something like that. And is it better? I think better we allocate more money to big challenges in our society, and there the private sector could contribute, but it's not the only solution. It has to be a combination.
I don't want to let this question go about societal culture, because the question I got about helping the rich was actually from public service then. So that is, that was the first reaction I got. But also what you mentioned, Gunilla, not to have the name on the plate, because that is a sin here in Sweden. We don't want to brag. We don't want to perceive that we believe that we are something. That's a gift from the Norwegian author Axel Sandemose, I think. Is that an obstacle? That you're not allowed? Where is the line where you are bragging and where you are very proud of what you're achieving?
Yeah, I think it's good that you shouldn't brag too much, because you should get the revenue when you see the results of what you are doing. If you do it just to put down or up yourself on a big pedestal or see how good I is, I think that could hit back on you. That's a Swedish tradition, but I think it's good. I mean, you shouldn't do it because you should have a lot of applause. I think you should do it because you appreciate what you're doing is very good.
What do you say, Gunilla?
No, I think that's also part of the, can I say the tradition, because philanthropy or charity has been long time in Sweden. And also many of the good social inventors and many others have done good things together, collectively as well, and changing minds and developing and bringing in new ideas from abroad and so on and so forth. So sometimes it's also a collective work. And I think if we focus on results, people are going to see that, hey, I also want to take part of this. And again, it's not about a few persons doing everything, it's about the many doing things. And that's why I'm a little bit upset still about the tax issue, because if there is a small company in my hometown Vadstena that would like to do something, and then they try really on their own balance sheet trying to do something for the local community, most likely it's not going to be allowed. And then they will refrain from doing it. And you see what I mean? I think also we should look into this to see how far goes the responsibility for many entrepreneurs if they would like to do something for the local community back home here, because it's part of their ecosystem, and it's good because the municipality can't do everything, and if they want to run a little bit ahead. So, and I think just to start to talk about these hurdles, taxes, legislation, the big foundations, how could we change them, because a lot of capital is also locked into old systems. And how can we leverage and change? And I think it's going to change. There are going to be new organizations and companies, new leaders that are really paving the way for this, because it's coming. But my, can I say problem, is really that we do not have a political discussion about that. And that's why I think Stockholm Symposium are important, and that we push for this, discuss it. And also again recognizing, may I tell you, because we talked about 2030 agenda before, I know that all these do-gooders that are involved in the NGO, they are sitting in another part of the town talking about 2030. And here are we that try to do something from a philanthropy point of view. Just to try to bridge us and to merge our meetings would mean a lot, because we still go to different places. So that's also about the leadership. So it's an open arena here.
And what would it take to bring these questions into the political agenda then?
Results, like Dan.
I want to take a little other angle. I think it's very good to cooperate. And in Malmö, we have big challenges with a lot of immigration, a lot of people are unemployed. And if you're unemployed for 10 years, you lose your self-esteem. Your kids could come out in different ways. It's I think the biggest problem we have in Sweden today. And of course, the city does a lot of things, but it's not that easy for me. Hey, I'm Dan Olofsson, get out on this Rosengård and do something. But what we did 6 years ago, I gathered 15 entrepreneurs, businessmen, and we said that I think we in business also could contribute, because it's not that easy for a civil servant at the city to create jobs. He has other things to do. It's not that easy for him, but we are creating jobs every day. And we gathered 15 people, and that was good because we worked together. And then we said, in 3 years' time, 1,000 people is going to get jobs through our activities. So we started, and we fixed that in 2.5 years. And now we're up in 2,000. But at the first year, we have to finance it, because you need to employ some people if you want to do something. So we financed it the first year, but then the city saw this was a very good project. We're creating a lot of jobs, saving a lot of money for us. So now they are paying for the administration. And we as business people, we do investment in different companies to create more jobs. So it's a combination. So here you get in a group of business people, you get the city, and we are addressing a very significant problems. And I think we need a lot of initiatives here because it's a huge program. I know that time to do it here in the Stockholm area with Michael Treshov and Alexander of Joknets is been engaged there. So I think business could do things, but it's not a solution on everything. But we could do other contributions, but so far we haven't been good enough, I would say, generally speaking.
Okay, on the theme good enough then, so let's say 3 years ahead, you talked about 3 years. What would you like to see in Sweden then? And you can choose whatever arena you'd like to see it on. Good changes.
More of cooperation and give and take between different sectors in order to solve concrete problems and to learn a methodology how to deal with that. And that's why I think they're going to come new organizations, companies and others to support that and also to identify the challenges in order to see that we can deliver more and better on a scale. So I'm really optimistic because I feel that common people sense the problem. And if they are also demanding, so it's not only about a few, it's really about we can work a little bit differently to deliver results. So generally, I'm optimistic. I think meetings like this are going to be much more crowded with much more different actors, and it's going to be also more of innovations and perhaps also competition. And more competition to Dan about what he's doing when he's paving the way, because he's taking a little piece of the pie, and he can't do everything. He's solving a few things. So I'm rather optimistic, and I hope that also politicians would like to see that would also help us to identify their roles into such a complicated processes and to have the give and take and the cooperation that Dan is talking about.
I think that a good thing about politics being in such a stir at the moment, both internationally but also nationally, is that it's a clear signal to people that you can't depend on politicians to solve all things. True. You have to do something by yourself. So that is perhaps
it's new people's movements coming up here.
Take on this. Dan, what would you like to be seen?
I would like to, I was on a debate like this 10 years ago. I remember it now, and I said that this huge problem with unemployment, migration, and so on, it's a big thing. And I don't see one single political initiative that changes this. Not from the Social Democrats, not from the Alliance, what do you call it in English? Alliance parties. And I said that, I'm sorry to say, I don't see any change. So this problem will grow. And now we're sitting here 10 years later. I'm very sorry to admit that I was right, because I wished I was wrong. And so I want to see that the political system now addresses this issue on a real way. And we have, this is the backside of the Swedish model, which has a lot of good things in it. But we have a system that protects those who are inside. But those who are outside, we don't care so much about them. And the unions are part of that protection for those who are inside. So we need to change here. And I still don't see signs of that. And that's tragic. So there I want to change from the political side. On the private side, I want to see much more private company being involved in more than the profit on the bottom line, which is important to developing the problem. I've been debating this about the profit in the welfare system. And some people say that profit are bad, but profit are good, because you could develop a company and it gets more secure. So I think the private sector can do much more, and it's good for the private sector. So that's what I want.
Okay, you can place your bets afterwards on the development in 10 years' time ahead, whether we got these reforms or not. I will end by saying I disagree profoundly with you both on the question of plates. I would love to see more plates all over the society. As we can see on Facebook now, people have crowdfunded books and things and whatever, and I think that's wonderful to tell, because that will tell others that you can do this. So I will end this panel with a very un-Swedish note. I disagree with you both, but thank you so much for contributing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tove. Thank you, Gunilla. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Interesting. So let's keep up this intersector collaboration. Let's start figuring out how to solve that. You guys have been such a great sport. It's been a long day. It's been an interesting day. Good job. And I wish to leave the stage to Per to make our closing remarks.
What a day. 8.5 hours. 8:30 to 5 o'clock. You've been very tirelessly sitting here listening to interesting discussions, I think. The heading for this symposium is an international symposium with a Swedish focus. And I think we'll learn a lot of things from a lot of speakers outside this country today. It's been truly inspiring. The first, I don't want to go through everything here because it's late. No, I know you want to go home. But the first heading was, the first part was a question: are Swedes overcoming the indifference to philanthropy? And I guess we are getting closer after this seminar. I think we learned a lot. I think we are approaching an international standard when it comes to philanthropy. The energy of Stephanie Shirley is always very encouraging, I think. To hear about Hollywood celebrities, how they do it over there. We don't have any Matt Damon, we don't have a Lady Gaga here, but we have Sara Larsson, we have Mikael Persbrandt, whatever. Maybe we can learn something from there. When it comes to the corporate section, I think it's very, very important to discuss that further. Maybe we can do that next year. Those discussions regarding matching grants, social impact investing, risk sharing that we heard about, all those things are, I think, very, very interesting. One thing that I come to think of is the corporate tax rate in Sweden, which is 20%. In the US, it's 40%. That tells me something that more can be done in cooperation with the public sector. And finally, as Tove said, politicians don't solve everything. Some say they don't solve anything. I don't think that's correct either. But I felt that the last section was ended on a positive and optimistic note. I hope we can see you all here next year. I would like to thank you for coming, of course, the speakers, Linda, and maybe above all, Roger over there. Don't go away, Roger. Thank you for being so tirelessly working with this symposium now for the 5th year. I know it's a hard work. Please join me in a big hand for you all and Roger.